Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today's show is a special joint production of the University of the District of Columbia and the University of Cape Town. I'm here in Cape Town, South Africa, where we'll be talking about legal education and the Constitutional Court of South Africa. The Honorable Albie Sachs served for 15 years on the Constitutional Court after having been in exile for over 20 years. He is author of numerous books, including The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs and The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. Albie Sachs earned his PhD at the University of Sussex, has taught at Columbia University, and been awarded honorary doctorates from the University of York and the University of Cape Town. Welcome, Albie.
And I got a BA LLB here at the University of Cape Town. 5 interesting, exciting, difficult, complicated years.
So you have a degree here as a regular student, and then you got the honorary doctorate.
Right.
Fair enough. Well, maybe if we can start with, actually, why don't we start with your schooling a little bit? What in your schooling helped prepare you for the distinguished career that you ended up having?
It prepared me and it didn't prepare me. I was prepared in the sense that we had very good law teachers. It was a 5-year course altogether. We did a little bit of old classical culture because of the Roman law foundations of our law. That was quite useful in a broad sense. I learned quite a lot about the technique of law. I learned quite a lot about the values of law. But there was another world out there, not far from where we're doing this interview now, of people living in shacks after a day or several hours, learning all the rolling phrases, the grand ideas of the world about justice and freedom and equity, rule of law. I would go to a night class and it would be poor people, very, very poor, with maybe 2 or 3 years schooling, candle lights, you just see the eyes, the teeth, passionate for justice, but hating the law. The law meant the police were arresting them for not having their documents. It meant going to jail for debt. The law was on top of them. The law wasn't their protector, their savior. And yet we were learning about the law being the instrument that granted people rights. And I found difficult to connect the two. Well, when I was doing the exams, I didn't raise all the problems that I had. And I got through my exams and I qualified. I practiced as an advocate, we were called, as an attorney in America at the bar. And again, the law had that double quality. On the one hand, you could get certain rights affirmed, dignified procedures, at least a voice for accused people, for people making their claims. On the other hand, it was white judges, white police, white charges, whites making the decisions about the lives of black people. And the laws favored the whites overtly. It was expressly racist. So I was very torn, very, very, very divided. And only when years later, decades later, after long, long struggles, and I'd been to jail and I'd been blown up by security agents of the police, I'd lost an arm, we come back to South Africa, 24 years of exile, and we start working on the new constitution. And it was the constitution that bound me together, knitted up the divided selves of Albie, wanting justice, wanting freedom in the country, but also helped to bind up the nation. And finding a way to connect up the grand phrases of the ages, of the world, of humanity, with the particular quests of people burning for justice, willing to give their lives for justice, but not believing in the law, connecting up the two to give our Constitution a special texture and a resonance and a meaning for South Africans and for the world.
Well, and that's a fair point. In terms of the texture of the Constitution that you helped to create, maybe you could say a word or two, if you don't mind, about what is unique about the South African Constitution and what went into it that made it unique.
First of all, it's a very value-driven constitution. It's not just a technical document like you sign a contract to buy a radio and there are all sorts of binding terms. This is a document that emerged out of pain, out of endurance, suffering, but idealism and hope from Robben Island, from people struggling in the underground, in the resistance, people internationally, from the supporters we got from all over the world, including the United States, wanting a free democratic South Africa, but also South Africa that would include everybody, even the oppressors and the children of the oppressors now ceased to be oppressors and children of oppressors. They became human beings, they became citizens. So the non-racial theme runs right through the document. That's not unique. It also affirms non-sexism as one of the foundational values of the Constitution. It sets up the Bill of Rights as the opening proclamation of the Constitution. It's not something tacked on like in the American Constitution. It begins with these basic values. What does it mean to be a human being in our country today? That sets a certain tone. Then comes the section dealing with the Parliament, the elected body, the executive, the judiciary. That's fairly standard. The Bill of Rights is very comprehensive. In the United States, you've got your 10 amendments, and the first one is freedom of speech, basically, and freedom of conscience. It's been called the firstness of the First Amendment. Our first item is equality after apartheid. Apartheid meant 15% of the population had all the rights, owned 87% of the land by law. Only they could become prime minister, president, be judges, be in charge of the country by law, head the police force, the army, take all decisions, and live in the beautiful areas, dominate the country completely. And the great majority of the people were seen as servants of the whites. We had to transform that completely. But in a way that didn't make the whites into a new marginalized minority, somehow out of sync, but integrated them, enabled them to become part of the nation, living as free people like everybody else. So equality had to be number one. It's the firstness of the equality principle. Secondly, the theme that runs right through is human dignity. The phrase doesn't exist in the American Constitution. For us, it's the keynote of our whole Constitution. It's human dignity that links up equality and freedom. Dignity is the binding. Freedom is not opposed to equality. Equality is not fighting freedom. It's always to achieve the dignity of our people. And we use that as the measuring rod, and it's become central to the work afterwards of interpreting the Constitution. So the Constitution spells out that these fundamental principles have to be interpreted in keeping with the principles of human dignity, equality, freedom. So that's spelled out very strongly. Then there are a number of other particularities. The Freedom Clause includes freedom from violence from the state and in private. So it's not enough that people who are in vulnerable situations, in domestic situations, feel protected by the Constitution when they walk in the streets, but also in the privacy of their homes. They should be free from that kind of violence. That's a profound constitutional principle. The Equality Clause is very comprehensive. And it's not just in America, the focus is very much on race, that's extended to gender. And it more or less stops there. In our case, explicitly mentioned will be race, color, creed, birth, family situation, sexual orientation, disability, are amongst the items mentioned in areas where historically there's been marginalization of people. And these are highlighted in the Constitution. Prima facie, if any distinction is drawn on the grounds of any of those items, then presumptively it's unfair, and unfair discrimination is prohibited. We have very strong children's rights, spelled out quite fully, very strong environmental rights, spelled out as constitutional principles. So it's a unique document in many ways. It's a document of the late 20th century, looking to the 21st century. And it has also strong social, economic, and cultural rights. And the social economic rights would include the right to education, particularly relevant to higher education. They include the right to housing, access to adequate housing, access to health care, to welfare, to food, and to water. And very intricate mechanisms are put in place to ensure that this isn't just pie in the sky, that these rights can be progressively implemented in keeping with the resources available to the state.
Well, that's interesting, because I remember when we first met 20-something years ago at UWC, I remember having an interesting conversation with you about whether or not there should be a certain number of calories that would be guaranteed to certain people as a right. And I thought that was kind of an interesting concept, because from our legal standpoint, that would be a very unusual thing to have happen.
We find it impossible to separate what I might call the bread rights and the freedom rights. The body from the mind. The mind works in a body. The mind is influenced. If you're dying of preventable diseases, if you're living out in the open, the rains are falling down, okay, you can vote, that's fine. I mean, I sometimes think in a rather absurd way, the essence of a freedom rights, excluding the circumstance in which people live, is you're dying of hunger, but with your last breath you can curse the government. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Which is not to say it's not important that you can denounce the government. That's absolutely fundamental. But you don't take away from that right when you say a right to a roof over your head, or at least the promise of getting it, and a direction that the state is responsible progressively to realize that right, the right to education, so that your vote is a vote that's based on information, knowledge, understanding. We have a right to information, very strong in our Constitution, also a right to just administrative action. So fairness is built into the mechanisms of our state as envisaged by the Constitution.
But I wonder if it has actually seeped down. I mean, I haven't been here for 20 years, so it's a little bit of a Rip Van Winkle experience I'm having. But I was out in Khayelitsha the other day, and I don't mean to insult you or anybody else in South Africa, but it didn't seem materially different than what I remembered it from 20 years ago. And so how is a student there, yes, I understand that the Constitution may be, excellent in in many ways, but are they really going to come to the University of Cape Town for a degree? I mean, how are they going to get here? And is it materially different?
It's different in every way, but it's just the beginnings of a much more profound transformation that's required. At least the student there will know that he or she doesn't need a permit to come to the University of Cape Town. Know that if he or she can get through exams, get basic education, will have a good opportunity, and will get assistance in terms of bursaries, in terms of stipends, will get various forms of support and backup once in the university. At least will be able to go to a library, to have access to books. At least there will be water, probably even in the shacks. The water is reaching the people, electricity is reaching the people who will be able to study. It's not enough. It's not even nearly enough. But it is moving forward, it's opening vistas. The inequalities are still immense, but you just have to walk around the campus, you can see. Whereas before, 20 years ago, there would have been a little more than a handful of black students in an overwhelmingly white campus. Now I think more than half the students at the University of Cape Town are black, and the number of people of color in the teaching and administration has also increased very dramatically.
Well, I see that at the university, but when I was in Khayelitsha, I talked to a number of people, and it's interesting that we're having this discussion, because a lot of people were saying they were frustrated that the progress of change hadn't been enough. And certainly in terms of the past laws, in terms of the freedoms that people enjoy, obviously that is different. But I meant in terms of the economic issues, where, since you were mentioning before about the inability to separate the economic issues from the political and the legal issues, and I think that that's a fair point, there are still some very poor people. And in all fairness, there are also poor people in my country and in other countries, and it's not crazy to say, well, how are their lives materially different than they were the day before?
I think probably the people you saw 20 years ago are, most of them, better off today than they were. But people you'd meet in Khayelitsha now, many have come in fairly recently from rural areas, desperately poor. They're still desperately poor. And we have something like 2.5 million brick or concrete homes have been given free to families living in shacks like Khayelitsha. If you take an average of 4 people per family, that's 10 million people out of almost a quarter of our total population have moved from those shacks. And they get water, electricity, sewage is all laid on, they can build on, they can sell afterwards and so on. It's dramatic by international standards, but it still leaves millions of people living in shacks like that. So it's not as though nothing is being done. A lot is being done, but it's not nearly enough. And one understands that people are impatient, and it's good that they're impatient. One doesn't want a society that's given up. People now also have the freedom to tell you that they're impatient. They're not scared to speak to you. They don't feel they're going to be penalized in any way. I think a lot depends on what you're comparing the country with. You're comparing the country with many other countries in Africa, Asia, sometimes even Europe. Our president steps down after 2 terms maximum. We have free and fair open elections. We don't have a powerful state that dominates everything. In fact, many people feel our state is too weak to encompass all the tasks that it has. So freedom is important. The right to speak your mind is extremely important, and that's really been gained. We also have mechanisms if you want to change. The political process is open to everybody, and that's really open. So that's also important for the poor. What is inhibiting things is corruption at all levels, particularly strong at the local levels, but it's found all the way to very, very high portions of our society. And we still don't have the freedom to walk around in the streets, to feel free in our bodies, freedom from criminal activities that I think should go with our liberty to speak our minds. That's also lacking. We were very, very hard hit by HIV. I think almost worse than any other country in the world. And it took us too long to come to terms, to get to grips with it. There were failures of government, definitely. But now we have the biggest antiretroviral program in the world. And one reason it's so successful is the Treatment Action Campaign, a huge civil society organization made up of people living with the virus and demanding access to antiretrovirals. They now help with the administration of the drugs. And it means they're on the ground. And so it's not just a doctor in a coat or a nurse in a coat who's telling people what to do. It's the people in the community in charge of the programs, of giving themselves dignified and decent lives. There's lots that's very positive, but lots that's still very ugly.
Well, let's speak, if we can, about what a student can do today. Since we deal with a lot of students, and a lot of people who watch our show are students and professors, what are legal students or law students, and what are other students able to do now to help affect some of the change that we've been talking about?
The law student's main task, I would say, is to become a well-qualified lawyer, able, after leaving the university, not only to earn a living, which everybody's entitled to do, but to do so in a way that serves the nation, serves the people. And happily, the curricula at the different universities, law faculties, have been adapted quite considerably, with much more emphasis now on rights for the community, rights for the poor, rights for disadvantaged groups in all sorts of different ways. There are a large number of NGOs that function, that deal with groups that need specialist attention. And I might say, having been a judge on the Constitutional Court, we were aided enormously by well-prepared cases. The Legal Resources Center brought the case on capital punishment, which he declared to be unconstitutional. The Equality Project, bringing case on same-sex relationships. Again, very well presented, well argued, with good argument from all sides of the issues. There's a project dealing with rights for women, and a very strong NGO dealing with that. Rights of the child, another project dealing with that. People concerned with questions of land. So if you have specialist interest of that kind, there is a role. There are bodies like the National Association of Democratic Lawyers, the Black Lawyers Association, that bring up issues also affecting the community and affecting black lawyers and progressive white lawyers. So there are quite a few bodies like that. There's a legal aid board. There are paralegals doing important work all over the country. I think also of considerable importance is many of the private law firms have pro bono sections. Sometimes it's the only way they can get the brightest students, because the brightest students are idealistic. They want to do something more than just win cases, often for clients who are not all that savory. They want to feel that their legal knowledge can be useful for the community, for society. And so these firms, quite astute, many of them working in the area of corporate law, company law primarily, dedicate some of their resources to pro bono work, and that's also something that students who have that social conscience, who are doing law, can look forward to.
Fair enough. And in terms of professors, we have a lot of professors in the United States. I know you would call them lecturers or senior lecturers or professors, but we have a lot of faculty members in the United States who are involved in a whole host of issues, some political and some not. And there's been a little controversy in the United States about whether or not professors should be involved or shouldn't be involved. Do you have a thought or two about that?
A thought of 2 or 3 or 4, sure. I think they become better professors. I think they become more acute. I think it sharpens their teaching and their research when they confront issues of real life. And to my mind, law without passion is not law. Law isn't just a series of commands and dictates and decrees and institutions. Law is concerned with human beings and their rights and their dignity. And if law becomes too desiccated, too abstract, too remote from the lives of people, it actually becomes bad law, not good law, bad law. So being involved in the affairs of society, confronting the agonies, the hopes, the expectations of ordinary people can only improve scholarship, not impoverish it. And that's quite natural here. It wouldn't be an issue in South Africa. The only issue would be which area you might find. So many people are very concerned with the green issues, and some of the professors did pioneering work in South Africa on the campus and off the campus in relation to environmental rights, health rights, land rights, gender rights, children's rights. All of these have been involved. It doesn't mean that you cease to be impartial when you're grading papers and exams. You don't mark somebody down because they disagree with your private views or even your public views on certain issues. You have to be objective, you have to be fair, you have to be impartial, but to be engaged in the life of society, I think, is a big plus for any professor.
Well, that's interesting, because I thought one of the most interesting things about the soft vengeance was your assertion that it was really important that you lived your life with meaning and that you really cared about what you cared about. And I respect that, and I know millions of people around the world do. But I wonder about a professor who's teaching students who feels conviction about something that perhaps you may not agree with or another faculty may not agree with. How do we resolve that in the marketplace of ideas when you're convinced of X and I'm convinced of Y? How do we get along, and how do we get along in the academic world?
Now, one of the things I'm convinced about is the importance of ideas, the importance of debate, the importance of not having a hegemony of ideas that close down debate and discussion. And if your ideas are good, they'll stand up. They can withstand the arguments, and if they can't withstand the arguments, it's damn time that you change them. So that's not a problem for me. There's no tension between pluralism, diversity of ideas, and having strong convictions myself. Because one of my strong convictions is freedom of debate and the importance of debate. It's not even just a freedom, it's a necessity.
Well, fair enough. I know we only have another minute or two. Is there anything that any advice that you would like to leave with for our American viewers who obviously follow your career and have followed your career, but advice that they're going through school right now?
For me, looking back on quite a long life in law, the key ingredient has been to get the proper connections between what I call reason and passion. Passion doesn't mean I love you, I love you, I love you. Passion means having a heart, empathy, feeling for what's happening in the world. Reason is intelligence, it's objective, it's sharp, it can be sometimes quite distressing in terms of the logical consequences. To get the two in combination, you become a fuller human being, a more realized human being, and a happier human being.
And you're recommending that for everybody, I assume.
I recommend that as a goal, which you never fully achieve, but something to be striven for forever.
Well, words to live by. Thank you very much, Albie. If you would like additional information about Justice Albie Sachs, please visit www.constitutionalcourt.org.za. If you have comments or suggestions about Higher Education Today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.